Shabbat Shalom. Yeah. Let's start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings us the Torah. I'm going to start with a reading kind of down the road, beyond the Torah portion today, before we begin the Torah portion, to kind of set the stage. And I want to do that because of the opening line to this Torah portion, which is Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 26. And we'll read the entire Torah portion, which will carry us through chapter 16, verse 17. But in Deuteronomy 11:26, we have the opening verse here, which is, see, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. A blessing and a curse. Now, we like to focus on the blessing part, not the cursing part. But yesterday I was talking about this Torah portion with beloved brother. You may know him as Paul Wilkelman. I usually call him Shaul Wilkelman. And he said that, well, you know, the curses are a blessing too. Well, that was news to me. But he explained it. Because the curses go hand in hand with the blessings. We focus on the positive aspect of blessings. And the blessings are there if we follow God's commandments. If we do what is right. But the curses are there to remind us that how we live our lives is very important to God. The curses are there to hold us back from breaking those commandments. And that's a type of protection as well. So it's not a matter of the curses are there primarily for God to come down heavy on us in punishment. Because God does not punish in that way. His punishment is for our betterment. His punishment is discipline. Discipline. So we will do what is right. So they go hand in hand. And that caused me to think about the tribes coming together when they entered the land. As we read this Torah portion, they're right on the borderline. They're ready to cross the Jordan, the river, and enter the promised land. After all these years, they've grown up in the wilderness, wandering for 40 years. Not really wandering, I don't know, we call it wandering, but it wasn't haphazard. God knew exactly where He was taking them and when and why. And He directed them. He directed them throughout their entire 40-year journey through the wilderness. And now they're ready to enter. When they go into the land, we see from echo of what Moshe is saying to them in this Torah portion today, we find in Joshua Yeah, Joshua 8, 30 through 35. Now Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moshe, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones over which no man has welded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. And there in the presence of the children of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moshe, which he had written. Then all Israel, with their elders and officers and judges, stood on either side of the ark before the priests, the Levites, who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, the stranger as well as he who was born among them. Half of them were in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moshe, the servant of the Lord, had commanded before, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of law. There is not a word of all that Moshe had commanded, which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women, the little ones, and the strangers who were living among them. How many of you have stood on Mount Gerizim? How many of you have stood on Mount Ebal? How many have stood by the altar that Joshua built on Mount Ebal? Yes, it's still there today. The ruins are there. About 50, 60 years ago, Palestinian terrorists attempted to dismantle those archaeological ruins. And they did cart off some of the stones. This past year, they actually did some more damage there. But there are Israeli defense forces who have a base on top of Mount Ebal. And they prevented them from further destruction. The altar is on Mount Ebal, the Mount of Cursing. The altar is on the Mount of Cursing. Now some say, wait a minute. Shouldn't it be on Mount Gerizim? Should it not be on Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing? Why would the altar be placed on the Mount of Cursing? A simple question can answer that. When is it more vital to draw near to God? It's when you've disobeyed. It's when you've disobeyed. When are you in greater need of repentance and God's forgiveness? When you have disobeyed. It's the absolutely best possible location for the altar. Deuteronomy 11:26. See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you listen to the mitzvot of Adonai, your God, that I'm giving you today. And the curse, if you don't listen to the mitzvot of Adonai, your God, but turn aside from the way I'm ordering you today, and follow other gods that you have not known. When Adonai your God brings you into the land you are entering in order to take possession of it, you are to put the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. Both are west of the Jordan, in the direction of the sunset, in the land of the Canaani, living in the Arava, across from Gilgal, near the pistachio trees of Moreh. For you are to cross the Jordan to enter and take possession of the land Adonai your God is giving you. You are to own it and live in it. And you are to take care to follow all the laws and rulings I'm setting before you today. Chapter 12. Here are the laws and rulings you are to observe and obey in the land Adonai, the God of your ancestors, has given you to possess as long as you live on earth. You must destroy all the places where the nations you are dispossessing served their gods, whether on high mountains, on hills, or under some leafy tree. Break down their altars, smash their standing stones to pieces, burn up their sacred poles completely, and cut down the carved images of their gods. Exterminate their name from that place. But you are not to treat Adonai your God this way. Rather, you are to come to the place where Adonai your God will put his name. He will choose it from all your tribes, and you will seek out that place, which is where he will live, and go there. You will bring there your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tents that you set aside for Adonai, the offerings that you give, the offerings you have vowed, your voluntary offerings, and the firstborn of your cattle and sheep. There you will eat in the presence of Adonai your God, and you will rejoice over everything you set out to do, you and your households, in which Adonai your God has blessed you. You will not do things the way we do them here today, where everyone does whatever in his own opinion seems right. Because you haven't yet arrived at the rest and inheritance which Adonai your God is giving you. But when you cross the Jordan and live in the land Adonai your God is having you inherit, and he gives you rest from all your surrounding enemies, so that you are living in safety, then you will bring all that I'm ordering you to the place Adonai your God chooses to have his name live. Your burnt offerings, sacrifices, tents, the offering from your hand, and all your best possessions that you dedicate to Adonai. And you will rejoice in the presence of Adonai your God, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female slaves, and the Levi staying with you, inasmuch as he has no share of inheritance with you. Be careful not to offer your burnt offerings just anywhere you see, but do it in the place Adonai will choose in one of your tribal territories. There is where you are to offer your burnt offerings and do everything I ordered you to do. However, you may slaughter and eat meat wherever you live and whenever you want, in keeping with the degree to which Adonai your God has blessed you. The unclean and the clean may eat it as if it were a gazelle or deer. But don't eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water. You're not to eat on your own property the tenth of your grain, new wine, or olive oil that you set aside for Adonai, or the firstborn of your cattle or sheep, or any offering you have vowed, or your voluntary offering, or the offering from your hand. No. You are to eat these in the presence of Adonai your God, in the place Adonai your God will choose. You and your sons, daughters, male and female slaves, and the Levi, who is your guest. And you are to rejoice before Adonai your God in everything you undertake to do. As long as you are living on your property, take care not to abandon the levy. When Adonai your God expands your territory, as he has promised you, and you say, I want to eat meat, simply because you want to eat meat, then you may eat meat as much as you want. If the place which Adonai your God chooses to place his name is too far away from you, then you are to slaughter animals from your cattle or sheep, which Adonai has given you, and eat on your own property as much as you want. Eat it as you would gazelle or deer. The unclean and clean alike may eat it. Just take care not to eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you are not to eat the life with the meat. Don't eat it, but pour it out on the ground like water. Do not eat it, so that things will go well with you and with your children after you, as you do what Adonai sees as right. Only the things set aside for God which you have, and the vows you have vowed to make, you must take and go to the place which Adonai will choose. There you will offer your burnt offerings, the meat and the blood, on the altar of Adonai your God. The blood of your sacrifices is to be poured out on the altar of Adonai your God, and you will eat the meat. Obey and pay attention to everything I'm ordering you to do, so that things will go well with you and with your descendants after you forever, as you do what Adonai sees is good and right. When Adonai your God has cut off ahead of you the nations you are entering in order to dispossess, and when you have dispossessed them and are living in their land, be careful, after they have been destroyed ahead of you, not to be trapped into following them, so that you inquire after their gods and say, how did these nations serve their gods? I want to do the same. You must not do this to Adonai your God. For they have done to their gods all the abominations that Adonai hates. They even burn up their sons and daughters in the fire for their gods. Chapter 13. Everything I am commanding you, you are to take care to do. Do not add to it or subtract from it. If a prophet or someone who gets messages while dreaming arises among you and he gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign or wonder comes about as he predicted when he said, let's follow other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them. You are not to listen to what that prophet or dreamer says, for Adonai your God is testing you in order to find out whether you really do love Adonai your God with all your heart and being. You are to follow Adonai your God, fear him, obey his mitzvot, listen to what he says, serve him, and cling to him. And that prophet or dreamer is to be put to death. because he urged rebellion against Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from a life of slavery in order to seduce you away from the path Adonai your God ordered you to follow. This is how you are to rid your community of this wickedness. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or your wife whom you love, or your friend who means as much to you as yourself, secretly tries to entice you to go and serve other gods, which you haven't known, neither you nor your ancestors, gods of the peoples surrounding you, whether near or far away from you, anywhere in the world, you are not to consent, and you are not to listen to him, and you must not pity him or spare him, and you may not conceal him. Rather, you must kill him. Your own hand must be the first one on him in putting him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. You are to stone him to death, because he has tried to draw you away from Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a life of slavery. Then all Yisrael will hear about it and be afraid, that they will stop doing such wickedness as this among themselves. If you hear it told that in one of your cities, which Adonai your God is giving you to live in, certain scoundrels have sprung up among you and have drawn away the inhabitants of their city by saying, "Let's go and serve other gods, which you haven't known," then you are to investigate the matter, inquiring and searching diligently if the rumor is true. If it is confirmed that such detestable things are being done among you, you must put the inhabitants of that city to death with the sword, destroying it completely with the sword, everything in it, including the livestock. Heap all its spoils in an open space and burn the city with its spoils to the ground for Adonai your God. It will remain a tell forever and not be built again. None of what has been set apart for destruction is to stay in your hand. Then Adonai will turn from his fierce anger and show you mercy, have compassion on you, and increase your numbers, as he swore to your ancestors, provided you listen to what Adonai says and obey all his mitzvot that I am giving you today, thus doing what Adonai your God sees as right. Chapter 14. You are the people of Adonai your God. You're not to gash yourselves or shave the hair above your foreheads in mourning for the dead, because you are a people set apart as holy for Adonai your God. Adonai your God has chosen you to be his own unique treasure out of all the peoples on the face of the earth. You're not to eat anything disgusting. The animals which you may eat are ox, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, roebuck, ibex, antelope, oryx, and mountain sheep. Any animal that has a separate hoof that is completely divided and also chews the cud, these animals you may eat. But you're not to eat those that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof. For example, the camel, the hare, and the coney are unclean for you because they chew the cud but don't have a separate hoof. While the pig is unclean for you because although it has a separate hoof, it doesn't chew the cud. You're not to eat meat from these or touch their carcasses. Of all that lives in the water, you may eat these, anything in the water that has fins and scales. These you may eat. But whatever lacks fins and scales, you're not to eat. It is unclean for you. You may eat any clean bird, but these you are not to eat. Eagles, vultures, ospreys, kites, any kind of buzzard, any kind of raven, ostriches, screech owls, seagulls, any kind of hawk, little owls, great owls, horned owls, pelicans, barn owls, cormorants, storks, any kind of heron, hoopoes, and bats. All winged swarming creatures are unclean for you. They are not to be eaten, but all clean flying creatures you may eat. You're not to eat any animal that dies naturally, although you may let a stranger staying with you eat it or sell it to a foreigner, because you are a holy people for Adonai your God. You're not to boil a young animal in its mother's milk. Every year you must take 1/10 of everything your seed produces in the field and eat it in the presence of Adonai your God in the place where he chooses to have his name live. You will eat the 10th of your grain, new wine and olive oil, and the firstborn of your cattle and sheep, so that you will learn to fear Adonai your God always. But if the distance is too great for you, so that you are unable to transport it, because the place where Adonai chooses to put his name is too far away from you, then, when Adonai your God prospers you, you are to convert it into money, take the money with you, go to the place which Adonai your God will choose, and exchange the money for anything you want: cattle, sheep, wine, other intoxicating liquor, or anything you please. And you are to eat there in the presence of Adonai your God and enjoy yourselves, you and your household. But don't neglect the Levi staying with you, because he has no share or inheritance like yours. At the end of every 3 years, you are to take all the tenths of your produce from that year and store it in your towns. Then the Levy, because he has no share or inheritance like yours, along with the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow living in your towns, will come, eat, and be satisfied, so that Adonai your God will bless you in everything your hands produce. Chapter 15. At the end of every 7 years, you are to have a Shemitah. Here's how the Shemitah is to be done. Every creditor is to give up what he has loaned to his fellow member of the community. He is not to force his neighbor or relative to repay it, because Adonai's time of remission has been proclaimed. You may demand that a foreigner repay his debt, but you are to release your claim on whatever your brother owes you. In spite of this, there will be no one needy among you, because Adonai will certainly bless you in the land which Adonai your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess. If only you will listen carefully to what Adonai your God says and take care to obey all these mitzvot I'm giving you today. Yes, Adonai your God will bless you as he promised you. You will lend money to many nations without having to borrow, and you will rule over many nations without their ruling over you. If someone among you is needy, one of your brothers, in any of your towns in your land, which Adonai your God is giving you, you're not to harden your heart or shut your hand from giving to your needy brother. No, you must open your hand to him and lend him enough to meet his need and enable him to obtain what he wants. Guard yourselves against allowing your heart to entertain the mean-spirited thought that because the 7th year, the year of Shemitah is at hand, you would be stingy toward your needy brother and not give him anything. For then he may cry out to Adonai against you, and it will be your sin. Rather, you must give to him, and you are not to be grudging when you give to him. If you do this, Adonai your God will bless you in all your work, in everything you undertake, for there will always be poor people in the land. That is why I am giving you this order. You must open your hand to your poor and needy brother in your land. If your kinsman, a Hebrew man or woman, is sold to you, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, you are to set him free. Moreover, when you set him free, don't let him leave empty-handed, but supply him generously from your flock, threshing floor, and winepress. For what Adonai your God has blessed you with, you are to give to him. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God redeemed you. That is why I'm giving you this order today. But if he says to you, I don't want to leave you, because he loves you and your household, and because his life with you is a good one, then take an awl and pierce his ear through right into the door, and he will be your slave forever. Do the same with your female slave. Don't resent it when you set him free, since during his 6 years of service, he has been worth twice as much as a hired employee. Then Adonai your God will bless you in everything you do. All the firstborn males in your herd of cattle and in your flock, you are to set aside for Adonai your God. You're not to do any work with a firstborn from your herd or shear a firstborn sheep. Each year, you and your household are to eat it in the presence of Adonai your God, in the place which Adonai will choose. But if it has a defect, is lame or blind, or has some other kind of fault, you're not to sacrifice it to Adonai your God. Rather, eat it on your own property. The unclean and the clean alike may eat it, like the gazelle or the deer. Just don't eat its blood, but pour it out on the ground like water. Chapter 16. Observe the month of Aviv, and keep Pesach to Adonai your God, for in the month of Aviv, Adonai your God brought you out of Egypt at night. You are to sacrifice the Pesach offering from flock and herd to Adonai your God, in the place where Adonai will choose to have his name live. You're not to eat any chametz with it. For 7 days you are to eat with it matzah, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste. Thus you will remember the day you left the land of Egypt as long as you live. No leaven is to be seen with you anywhere in your territory for 7 days. None of the meat from your sacrifice on the first day in the evening is to remain all night until morning. You may not sacrifice the Pesach offering in just any of the towns that Adonai your God is giving you, but at the place where Adonai your God will choose to have his name live. There is where you are to sacrifice the Pesach offering in the evening when the sun sets, at the time of year that you came out of Egypt. You are to roast it and eat it in the place Adonai your God will choose. In the morning you will return and go to your tents. For 6 days you are to eat matzah. On the 7th day there is to be a festive assembly for Adonai your God. Do not do any kind of work. You are to count 7 weeks. You are to begin counting 7 weeks from the time you first put your sickle to the standing grain. You are to observe the festival of Shavuot weeks for Adonai your God, with a voluntary offering, which you are to give in accordance with the degree to which Adonai your God has prospered you. You are to rejoice in the presence of Adonai your God, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female slaves, the Leviim living in your towns, and the foreigners, orphans, and widows living among you, in the place where Adonai your God will choose to have his name live. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Then you will keep and obey these laws. You are to keep the festival of Sukkot for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and winepress. Rejoice at your festival, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female slaves, the Leviim and the foreigners, orphans and widows living among you. 7 days you are to keep the festival for Adonai your God in the place Adonai your God will choose, because Adonai your God will bless you in all your crops and in all your work. So you are to be full of joy. 3 times a year, all your men are to appear in the presence of Adonai your God in the place which he will choose. At the festival of Matzah, at the festival of Shavuot, and at the festival of Sukkot. These are not to show up they are not to show up they are not to show up before Adonai empty-handed, but every man is to give what he can in accordance with the blessing Adonai your God has given you. What comments do you have?
Thanks, Stevie, for reading that difficult, even to read in English. For many years, scholars, we've talked about this. For many years, scholars understood that what the beginning in chapter 12, what you read through the rest of it, related to the Ten Commandments from Exodus 20, and that are repeated in Deuteronomy chapter 5, I believe it is. So anyway, here's how they relate. The Ten Commandment subjects relate to 12, for example, in Commandments 1 and 2, chapter 12. Commandment 3 begins around 13, verse 1, and 4th commandment begins around at Exodus chapter 14, verse 28. Remember, the Bible chapter and verses were not in the original manuscripts.
True.
So anyway, 4th commandment continues through through 16, verse 17. 5th commandment begins at 16, verse 18, and then continues through chapter 18, verse, the last verse, 22. So in that order, then, the scholars could see that the commandments of God that had been given in Exodus 20 related to the subjects in Deuteronomy, the stipulations that were given, but they couldn't figure out, and they've known that for at least a century, but they couldn't figure out what were the separations, what divided the commands from each other. As they studied the Hebrew text, they realized that the separations were homologues, words that sound alike or similar in Hebrew. One word would have one word, and then a similar sounding word would be in the next verse. So, for example, a boat, meaning a boat that floats in the water, sounds like the word about in English, and in the like way, then in Hebrew, they used a word that sounded similar to the next word in the next sentence as the way of logically dividing between, God used actually, and as Moses repeated it, the way of dividing between the subject matter from the different commandments. So logically, if you want to understand how it's structured, that's true. For example, all the predatory birds are prohibited, and non-predatory birds are allowed to be eaten. Predatory birds typically eat dead things, and remember, associations with death were not allowed for humans. Like at a burial, you had to, if you were touched the body or near it, you were considered unclean for 2 days in similar ways. Anyway, that's enough for me.
So in one sense, then we see an expansion on the Ten Commandments, and there are those that have seen, they also form the outline for Scripture and an exposition on these major headings, the Ten Commandments, and consequently, by enumeration, rabbinic sages have identified a total of 613 commandments that would fall under these major headings of that. So, that's an affirmation as well. And yet, I remember hearing this the first time I heard someone mention that there were like 613 commandments. I thought, well, that's a lot more than 10. You know, it was a lot more than 10. And yet but then it was a replacement theology Christian denomination. And basically the next comment was, aren't you glad that you were not burdened by these 613 commandments? And that was basically the focus that many have. Oh, yeah. Because what do we have instead? Well, we just have the two that Yeshua is, right? But they make a distinction. They didn't see that Yeshua was doing the very same thing with the Ten Commandments. He was saying the greatest commandment was simply the first part of the Ten Commandments, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And he prefaced that with the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So, that was the beginning. And then, the other commandments, to love your neighbor as yourself, is the summation of the others, the rest. So, but we've gone so far off track historically, and God is bringing us back together again. So that's what. So thank you for that. Okay. Yeah. We'll get you next.
Okay, in chapter 14, verse 21, it says, "You are not to eat any animal that dies naturally, although you may let a stranger staying with you eat it or sell it to a foreigner, because you are a holy people for Adonai your God." So why can a stranger or foreigner eat it? And in modern terms, who would be the stranger and foreigner today? Why is it set apart here?
That is a wonderful question. That's a great question. And I actually heard the question. That's really good. Appreciate that. So I can't duck and say, well, I don't know. But I also said that Donnie is sitting right in front of you. And I don't really have an answer for that. But maybe Donnie would come to my rescue here.
Can you guys hear me? So it comes down to the idea of whether or not you personally are in a covenant relationship with God. Before a person can follow Torah, they need to be in a covenant relationship with God. They need to experience the redeeming work of God. It's kind of why we as Christians or believers in Messiah, it's kind of wrong for us to force morality on people if they don't have Yeshua yet, because if you just try to change people's morals without them having the redeeming work of Messiah in their lives, they are still going to be separated from God in eternity. You can be a moral person, you can technically follow the Torah, but if you don't have a relationship with God, you are spiritually dead. It's also under the context that the scripture verse that talks about how God gave Moses the Torah for the children of Israel, it was given to Israel as a bride. The Torah itself was given to Israel as a bride. The exact context of the verse says all of the commandments were given to Israel, but that word also means bride. It was given as a bride. It's a meal you can't really partake of unless you are in a covenant relationship. And we notice here, also in the verse, that there are certain things that slaves, certain things that non-Jewish people, non-Israelite people have. Like, I can't charge interest to my brother. I can't, pursue payment of a debt after Shemitah for my brother, but if he's outside the camp, I can. And it's more about he's not in a covenant relationship. And it's not an unloving thing. It's more, before I can feed a person Torah, I need to give them the relationship. But also regarding the slave is pretty interesting, because we also notice that the slave has to marry. He's given a Canaanite wife, and he has to leave that wife in the Shemitah. That is something obviously against Torah, but the question is why? Because he's a servant. When you're a servant, you are under your master's authority. You're not under God's authority. Why? Because this was a person sold into slavery. Why was he sold? Because he stole. When he stole from his brothers, he was saying, I reject God's authority over me. And because of that, now he has to be rehabilitated, because in the Jewish and the Israelite, the ancient Hebrew culture, they did not have a prison reform system. Their prison criminal justice system was, if you stole and you couldn't repay what you stole, you had to go serve for 6 years. So it comes down to, ultimately, these are people who have rejected God's authority over their life. And before they can have the Torah, before they can follow the commandments, before they can eat kosher, before they can do all that, they have to make things right with God first. Hopefully that answers that.
Great answer. Thank you.
I just love the fact, I don't need that, I'll take it. Stevie can't do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I
Thank you,
just
Donnie.
love the fact that, like yours, the 613 commands or whatever. I just love how all that really does is confirm the 10. It's like examples of teaching us how to follow the 10. It's just awesome. Great teaching, Stevie.
Yeah, God works it together. I appreciated your response, and we're running out of time here, but is there anybody else? I think we have time for one final comment. There we go.
This is just an observation, and I don't know if you experienced this, Stevie, when you went to Hayovel, but we were camped on the Mount Blessing. And I have like arthritic type of stuff, aches and pains throughout my day. When I was in Israel, I never experienced any pain. I never experienced you're up and down the mountains, you know, you're planting trees and harvesting. I never experienced any of that arthritic pain. All the time we were on the Mount of Blessing and in Israel, as soon as I landed back in the States, all that stuff hit me again. So the Mount of Blessing is very, very powerful for any of you who have never experienced that.
Thank you for that. You know, I can affirm that. I've made 2 trips to Prune, and that's really tough on the all day long. You know, they'll leave half a day. We only really worked half a day, most days. Occasionally we had to get more done, but still, that stress that would be there. Yet I had no problems. I had plenty of energy. I could do the work. Now I know there were those watching out for me as well, but primarily God was watching out for me, and He was blessing me because I was seeking to be a blessing to Yisrael. And God will bless those who bless Yisrael, right? And He will curse those who curse Yisrael. Okay? So again, it goes back, and what Donnie said. That this is about relationship. It's about our relationship with the Father, but also our relationship with each other. We are in relationship with each other. We are a family, and we have obligations to each other. And that's what we see throughout this Torah portion, that throughout it, God is calling for responsible obedience, a joyful obedience, not a grudging one. He wants us to be open-handed because He's open-handed. He wants us to be loving and supportive of others because He is loving and supportive of others. He wants us to be like Him. And that's what He's asking us. So we can find joy in that. And He wants to bless us and overflow those blessings. But He's tying it. He's tying it to the commandments. Now, I'm not talking about that we're earning our salvation. That's not what was being addressed here. But what is being addressed is how we live our lives. And God has set it up so that if we obey His commandments, He will bless us. And if we refuse, especially if we willfully refuse, then we're putting the curses upon us. Okay? That's all we have time for. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed you, our God, who brings us the Torah. Amen. Thank you for your attention.